Well, it's a very dismal day out there. It's very overcast, almost dark, light rain, and probably is going to rain the rest of the day, but very dismal day. Today we're starting a new book, and it's amazing to me how God works. Just about 2 days ago, my wife and I were talking about how differently people from the north and from the south see black people, how differently they treat them, how differently they talk about them, and the prejudice that exists depending on where you were born and raised, and how differently you see races as Christians versus non-Christians. Then yesterday, the pastor at Five Forks Baptist Church, Jeff Black, was preaching a message from the book of Acts on Apollos and how he was directed to more clearly understand the gospel and how he was growing in his understanding of the gospel from being a disciple of John the Baptist and John the Baptist teaching to being one that would preach the gospel of Jesus. And then today, as I started to prepare to go to the next chronological book, which, as I've mentioned before, is very difficult to go in absolute chronological order because even the greatest theologians don't agree on exactly when each of these books were written, it seemed to me that the next logical book for me to go to was Philemon. And it was written by Paul, approximately AD, and we have a period of time that would go from anywhere from AD 60 through maybe 62 or 63, depending on which theologian you want to follow. I've taken 61 for my putting them in order of chronological order, and so Philemon seemed to be the next book, and I thought, well, I'll blow through that in a day or two. Until I began to, having read through the book and having made an outline of my own and having looked at what it said to me, decided that I would go, since it's such a small book, one chapter, 25 verses, take a look at see what John Phillips had to say. And as I just began with John Phillips, all of a sudden it was like I was Apollos and Phillips was now being in a Priscilla and Aquila for me, was going to give me a more righteous way to look at the scriptures in Philemon. And so I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you to read this one chapter, this one book, this 25 verses, and do it as John Phillips recommended we do it. And that is from different perspectives. He suggests that there's a way that we could look at it as if we were the slave that was going back to Philemon. We would look at it as if Paul was looking at sending a slave back to Philemon. We would look at it as a way that the Hebrews would have treated slaves versus the way Romans treated slaves. And so, without giving you all of the ones that he said, or the ones that I came up with, I want to challenge you to do that. I want you to read it through as if you were looking at it through Paul's eyes. I want you to look at it as if you were looking at it through Philemon's eyes. I want you to look through as the slave himself, Onesiphorus, would look at it. And so, as you do that, I think you're going to get a different perspective on this book. And perhaps you've heard sermons where people read a lot more into it than was there. And maybe the other way around. Maybe they presented a message that was very much just exactly what the text said without reading anything into it, which you should read something into it for application. In any case, I challenge you to do that. The other thing that I want to suggest to you today is that we have books in the Bible which are macro views. For example, the Gospel of Luke, would be a macro view of Jesus' life. And you may have heard a pastor preach a message on the entire Bible, which was a macro view of the Bible. He didn't try to preach everything that was in there, but just told you about how important the Bible was. And then there's the micro view, and an example of that would be like the book of Esther or the book of Ruth, where during a particular time in history, the Bible zeroes in on one individual or one particular event in history. Recently, a neighbor of ours took a picture of a deer on the dam of the lake, and he was coming down to get a drink of water, and because she was probably 500 to 1,000 feet away from the deer, she got a beautiful sunset, or sunrise, I guess probably. Sunrise, the dam itself with its foliage and its flowers and bushes, and fairly small size in appearance deer. And then I took and blew that up because I wanted to see more detail of the deer, and I got a micro view. Her picture was a macro view, and it was quite a beautiful shot. The micro view was quite interesting if you wanted to see the detail of the deer, in which we found that it was a male and that it's just starting to raise its antlers. They were just maybe 5 or 6 inches long, and you couldn't see that kind of detail in the original picture just looking at it quick glance. So today, when we start this book, we're going to be looking at a micro view. We're going to look at a particular situation, a particular event, where Paul sends a note. So you can't even really call it a letter, 25 verses. It's just a note that he sends to Philemon about a situation. And so it's a micro view of one brief moment in history. And yet it has so much for us if you take the book from the different views. So let me challenge you to do that. And for the next several days, we're going to be looking at the different views of this book and see how it applies to our lives. And that's my thought for today. God bless you and have a great day.